How many times have you told yourself, "I'll start on Monday," only for Monday to arrive, and you whisper, "Maybe tomorrow, then next week, then when I feel ready," but readiness never comes. What arrives instead is the quiet weight of time stretching on. You're not lazy and you're not broken. You're caught in an invisible conflict between the part of your brain that longs to grow and the part that fears what that growth might cost. Tonight, in Neuro Nap Academy, we'll uncover the secret science of procrastination, why your brain delays what matters most, how dopamine hijacks your attention, and why this cycle can last for years unless you finally see it clearly. This isn't about time management, it's about emotional protection, about realizing you're not avoiding the task itself, but the feeling underneath it. And because these ideas can be hard to hold all at once, I've prepared a free practical guide with the key insights from tonight's video. You'll find it in the description, like a map you can return to whenever you need it. So let this be your quiet place to listen, and together we'll begin with the secret science of why you can't stop procrastinating. You tell yourself you'll begin in a moment. Perhaps after a sip of water, after scrolling just a little further, after sending one more message. And yet the moment stretches, slips away, reshapes itself into an endless horizon called later. You know this pattern intimately. It's the feeling of holding a book you never open, the gym shoes waiting by the door, the project file blinking on your desktop while your attention floats elsewhere. It is not the absence of intention. You always mean to start. It is the delay itself, delicate and heavy, like a fog that clings. Pause here. Picture the sensation of standing before a road you must walk. The path is clear, and your destination certain, but your feet feel bound by an invisible tether. You tell yourself you'll move in a moment, and that moment keeps dissolving into another, and another, until hours blur. This is the eternal later. It is not simply a quirk of habit, it is an architecture built deep within your brain. Neuroscientists describe procrastination not as a failure of willpower, but as a tug of war between systems. One part of your mind, the planning, reasoning voice, points toward the long-term reward. Another, more ancient voice, whispers of comfort, escape, and the relief of postponement. To you, the hesitation feels simple. I'll do it tomorrow. But beneath the surface, neural circuits are weighing discomfort against pleasure, threat against safety, and the present moment almost always wins the negotiation. Think of it like two storytellers living in your head. The first, your rational mind, sketches the vision of a future self, healthy, accomplished, organized, fulfilled. The second, your emotional core, speaks in urgent tones of now, the relief of avoidance, the sweetness of a distraction, the quiet comfort of not facing discomfort. Each time you hesitate, the second storyteller raises its voice, and so the future, however radiant, grows fainter, like a star too distant to guide your steps. But what makes later so seductive? It is not merely laziness, though the world often calls it that. Laziness suggests a lack of care, but you do care. That is why the delay stings. The truth is more subtle. Later is a psychological shield. Your brain perceives the task as a potential source of pain, stress, boredom, or even fear of failure, and so it chooses delay as a form of protection. By postponing, you avoid the discomfort for just a little longer. Imagine holding a letter you must open. Inside may lie good news or disappointment, but your body resists tearing the envelope. That resistance is not disinterest. It is the weight of anticipation, the fear that knowledge might wound. Procrastination works the same way. You delay not because you don't want to know, but because you want to shield yourself from the sting of knowing too soon. Science supports this. When brain scans observe someone delaying, the areas tied to pain and threat light up, as though the task were not a neutral chore, but an approaching predator. The decision to scroll instead of start is, on a neural level, an act of avoidance, a way to soothe the tension coursing through your circuits. The irony is that the relief is fleeting. Soon guilt creeps in, and the cycle tightens. Delay becomes discomfort itself. And here lies the paradox. Procrastination pretends to offer freedom, but it binds. Each time you postpone, you trade a sharp moment of effort for a lingering cloud of unease. The undone task shadows your thoughts, intruding in quiet hours, staining rest with the knowledge of what remains. Later is not empty. It is filled with the weight of all you have promised yourself but not yet lived. Think about this. The word procrastinate comes from Latin pro, meaning forward, and crastiness, meaning of tomorrow. To procrastinate is literally to hand your life to tomorrow, but tomorrow never arrives as tomorrow. When it comes, it is only ever today, and so delay stretches endlessly, a horizon you never reach. Still, you are not powerless. The very fact that you can notice this cycle is itself a first step. Your mind, by watching its own hesitation, plants the seed of freedom. Awareness opens a crack in the loop, a place where curiosity can slip in. Instead of asking, "Why am I so weak?" you may ask, "What is my brain protecting me from right now?" That subtle shift reframes delay from failure to signal, from flaw to message. Perhaps the message is that you fear the task is too big, or that you worry it won't meet your standards, or that you crave rest your body hasn't had. Each interpretation leads somewhere new. Delay then becomes a teacher, whispering truths about your needs, your fears, your perfectionism, even your identity. So the next time you find yourself saying, "later," pause for a breath. Imagine the word not as a wall, but as a doorway. Behind it is the deeper conflict, the hidden tug between your present comfort and your future self. That is where our exploration turns next. Because the eternal later is not only a habit, it is the visible surface of an ancient battle inside your brain. And to understand why you cannot stop delaying, you must first listen to the two voices locked in that struggle. Picture yourself at a crossroads. To your left, a quiet path stretches toward something distant, a completed project, a healthier body, a life aligned with your deeper goals. To your right, a brighter road beckons, with instant ease, a snack, a message, a quick distraction. You stand between them, sensing the weight of choice. But what you don't notice is that this crossroads isn't outside you, it is inside your brain. Two regions, two ancient forces, negotiate over which way you will turn. One is your prefrontal cortex, the thoughtful planner. It sits behind your forehead, weaving strategies, imagining the future, sketching maps of long-term success. This is the voice of your better intentions, the part of you that writes lists, sets alarms, envisions the person you wish to become. Without it, you would drift aimlessly, chasing only the hunger of the present. The other is your limbic system, buried deeper and older, a cluster of structures evolved to keep you alive in a dangerous world. It is fast, emotional, vigilant. It speaks in urges rather than plans. When it senses discomfort, fear, uncertainty, the possibility of failure, it tugs you toward safety. And safety, in the modern world, often looks like scrolling, eating, or distracting yourself. What once kept your ancestors alive now keeps your projects untouched. Imagine them as two guardians pulling at the same rope. The prefrontal cortex pulls steadily, whispering of long-term reward. The limbic system pulls sharply, urging escape from present discomfort. Neither is wrong. One seeks meaning, the other protection. But when they lock in conflict, you feel it as hesitation, as the ache of procrastination. Neuroscience experiments reveal this struggle with surprising clarity. When volunteers are asked to choose between a small reward now or a larger reward later, brain scans light up differently depending on the choice. Opting for the immediate reward activates the limbic regions, glowing with urgency. Waiting for the delayed reward calls upon the prefrontal cortex, glowing with restraint. You live in the balance between these two illuminations, tugged back and forth by competing lights. Think of it like a stage play. The prefrontal cortex is the director, calmly explaining the script, envisioning the grand finale. The limbic system is the actor in the spotlight, consumed by the intensity of the moment. The actor's cries are louder, rawer, more persuasive. And so even though the director holds the plan, the actor often seizes the scene. That is why you find yourself watching videos instead of writing, cleaning instead of calling, eating instead of exercising. The louder voice has won, for now. But here is the subtlety. This conflict is not evidence of weakness. It is the architecture of human life. Every person lives with this internal negotiation. The difference lies not in erasing one voice, but in learning how to let them speak without letting one dominate blindly. Philosophers might describe this as the tension between reason and passion, between Apollo and Dionysus, between order and impulse. Yet neuroscience reminds us they are not enemies, but partners. Your prefrontal cortex cannot inspire without the spark of emotion. Your limbic system cannot survive without the guidance of foresight. Procrastination is not a flaw. It is the sign of a dialogue still unresolved. Consider a moment when you resisted distraction. Perhaps you sat down to study, and though your phone pulsed with notifications, you stayed with the task. That was your prefrontal cortex, holding the rope, summoning discipline. But recall too a moment when fear of failure kept you from beginning at all. That was your limbic system shielding you from perceived danger. Both moments are human, both rooted in the same brain that seeks both growth and safety. The question then is not why am I weak, but how can these two voices learn to cooperate? How can the planner respect the protector, and the protector trust the planner? This question is at the heart of escaping the cycle of delay. Pause and reflect. When you whisper, "I'll do it tomorrow," whose voice are you truly hearing? Is it the anxious limbic system shielding you from pain, or the weary prefrontal cortex postponing with calculation? To answer this is to glimpse the inner mechanics of your own hesitation. And once you see the battle clearly, you notice something else. The limbic system holds a powerful ally. It has dopamine on its side, the chemical of desire, of immediate pleasure. Dopamine doesn't wait for the distant reward. It flows in the thrill of the click, the sweetness of the scroll, the instant relief of avoidance. And that is where the trap deepens, because while your cortex dreams of the future, your limbic system floods the present with chemical certainty. The brain begins to lean toward the immediate, not because it is rational, but because it feels rewarding. That is the trap we must now explore, the silent grip of dopamine, and how it seduces you into choosing the sweetness of now over the nourishment of tomorrow. Picture yourself holding a phone. You tell yourself you'll just check one message, glance at one update. Yet an hour later, you're still there, scrolling, tapping, chasing a trail of little lights and sounds. What kept you hooked? It wasn't the information itself. It was the invisible chemistry of your brain, the steady drip of a molecule designed to make the present irresistible. That molecule is dopamine, often called the brain's pleasure signal. But dopamine is less about pleasure itself, and more about anticipation. It spikes not when you enjoy the reward, but when you sense it is coming. A notification ping, the flash of a new email, the sight of unopened messages. These tiny cues trigger a wave of expectation. It's that wave, not the reward itself, that feels magnetic. Think of dopamine as a spotlight in the dark theatre of your mind. Wherever it shines, your attention follows. The limbic system knows this well. When a task feels heavy, uncertain, or unrewarding, dopamine does not shine on it. Instead, it shines on the alternative, on the easy, colourful, instantly gratifying activity. And so you delay, not because you don't care about the important task, but because your brain is chemically nudged towards something that feels rewarding now. Science demonstrates this in small but striking ways. In experiments, rats given a lever that releases dopamine-inducing stimulation press it obsessively, even ignoring food and water. Their brains, flooded with anticipation, are captured by the loop of seeking. Humans are not so different. Each time you refresh a feed or peek at a message, your brain experiences a miniature version of this cycle. It's not weakness, it's wiring. Now imagine this same mechanism applied to procrastination. You face a report, a chapter, an email. The task feels vague, uncertain, perhaps even uncomfortable. Dopamine does not rise for it because the reward is distant and abstract, but a small distraction, the glow of a video, the sweetness of a snack, offers immediate, tangible feedback. Dopamine surges. In that moment, your brain is rewarded for avoidance. The delay itself becomes pleasurable. Picture this, like two fruits before you. One is ripe and sweet, ready to eat now. The other is still green, promising nourishment later, but unappealing in the moment. Your brain, guided by dopamine, reaches for the ripe fruit almost every time. That is the trap of instant gratification. The present always feels brighter than the future. Philosophers have wrestled with this same paradox for centuries. Why do we choose what harms us in the long run for the sake of what soothes us now? The answer lies not in morality, but in biology. The brain evolved in environments where immediate rewards, food, safety, shelter were essential for survival. Waiting for distant benefits made little sense in a world where tomorrow was uncertain. Today, that same wiring collides with modern life, where the most meaningful goals, graduating, writing, building, healing, require long spans of effort with delayed payoffs. This explains why the same brain that can imagine a novel, a business, or a healthy life can still falter before the lure of a glowing screen. Your prefrontal cortex holds the vision, but your limbic system, pulsing with dopamine, pulls you toward comfort. The conflict is not laziness, it is evolution itself. Reflect for a moment on how this feels in your own life. That first bite of chocolate, that glance at a message, that one-click purchase, all small victories of the present over the future. And yet after the glow fades, a shadow follows. Guilt, frustration, the awareness that you traded a larger meaning for a smaller relief. It is like sipping salt water, refreshing in the moment, but leaving you thirstier than before. But here lies a quiet power. Once you see dopamine for what it is, not a command but a signal, you can begin to change the game. By designing tasks to offer small, immediate cues of progress, you can coax dopamine back onto your side. A checkmark on a list, a visible token of completion, even a timer that signals you've worked for 2 minutes. These can all trigger the same chemical spotlight, making the long-term goal feel rewarding in the short term. So procrastination, in part, is a matter of design. The brain does not crave the task itself, it craves the feeling of reward. And if you can lace your work with tiny rewards, the trap of instant gratification loosens. But before we explore how to redesign your environment, we must pause at a deeper truth. The preference for the present is not just about dopamine. It is about how the brain discounts the future, shrinking it until tomorrow seems faint and unreal. This tendency, called temporal discounting, is the next layer of the puzzle, and it explains why even the most meaningful dreams can be sacrificed to the ease of now. Imagine being offered 2 choices. In one hand, someone holds a crisp bill, money you can take right now. In the other hand, they promise a larger sum. Double, perhaps even triple, but only if you wait a week. Almost every study shows the same pattern. Most people, when faced with this decision, take the smaller, immediate reward. Why? Because to your brain, the future always feels thinner, more fragile, less real than the present. This tendency has a name in psychology: temporal discounting. It describes how the mind systematically undervalues rewards that are farther away in time. A distant prize seems faint compared to the vividness of something right in front of you. It is as if your mental lens blurs anything that lies beyond the horizon of now. To feel this more deeply, think about how you relate to your future self, the person you will be tomorrow, next month, or 10 years from now. Your brain often perceives that self almost as a stranger. Neural imaging confirms this. When people imagine themselves in the far future, their brain activity resembles what happens when they think about other people. In a subtle but profound way, your brain treats your future self like an acquaintance, not like you. And just as you might prioritize your own comfort over a stranger's, you prioritize the present you over the future you. This makes evolutionary sense. Our ancestors lived in environments of scarcity and danger. Waiting for a distant harvest or saving resources for years might have meant not surviving the immediate threats of hunger or predators. The brain became biased toward what could be secured now. Fast forward to modern life, and the same wiring persists, even though our goals now demand patience, studying for years before a degree, working months before a project is finished, saving decades before retirement. But here lies the trap. Because your brain discounts the future, the long-term reward feels less motivating than the immediate distraction. Writing a book chapter today may lead to fulfillment months later, but checking your phone gives a spark of satisfaction in seconds. Your brain chooses the spark not because it is wiser, but because it feels closer. Imagine standing on a shoreline. Across the water, you see a distant island filled with everything you want: health, mastery, meaning, success. But the island looks hazy, unreachable, shimmering like a mirage. Meanwhile, seashells sparkle right at your feet, small, immediate treasures. Most people bend down to pick up the shells, forgetting the island entirely. That is temporal discounting. The island fades, the seashells win. Experiments illustrate this vividly. In one famous study, children were left alone with a marshmallow and told they could eat it immediately or wait and receive two. Some children resisted, distracting themselves, humming songs, covering their eyes. Others succumbed, eating quickly. Years later, follow-ups showed those who waited tended to have better academic and life outcomes. While the story is more nuanced than it first appeared, the principle remains. The ability to value the future shapes how life unfolds. Now, think about procrastination through this lens. You promise yourself, "I'll work tomorrow," because tomorrow feels abstract, almost weightless. The cost of delay, lost hours, lost momentum, doesn't fully register because your brain discounts it. You are biased to think, "I'll have more energy later, I'll feel ready later." Yet when later arrives, it transforms into today, and the same bias repeats. The island always remains far, the shells always sparkle nearby. Philosophically, this reveals a tension in human life. We are creatures of time who struggle to honor time. We dream in years but act in moments. We pledge ourselves to futures we rarely protect in the present. And so procrastination becomes not just a personal struggle, but an existential one. The difficulty of being loyal to the self you have not yet become. There is also an emotional weight to this. When you delay, part of you knows you are betraying your own tomorrow. You feel the guilt, the frustration, the quiet grief of a promise broken, not to someone else, but to yourself. This is why procrastination stings so deeply. It is not only lost productivity, it is lost trust in your own word. Yet here is the glimmer of hope. Temporal discounting is not fixed. You can learn to make the future feel closer, more tangible, more alive. Simple strategies like visualizing your future self vividly, writing letters to them, or even using digital tools that age your face have been shown to reduce discounting. By making tomorrows you feel real, the brain values their rewards more. Suddenly, the island across the water doesn't seem so far. Another way to bridge the gap is to break long-term rewards into immediate cues. Instead of waiting months to feel achievement, you create milestones that deliver smaller doses of satisfaction along the way. Each page written, each workout logged, each box checked becomes its own reward. In this way, you hack the bias. You make progress feel immediate, not abstract. Reflect for a moment. The next time you feel the tug of delay, pause and ask, what am I truly valuing here? The comfort of shells at my feet, or the vision of the island I seek? Sometimes you may still choose the shells, and that is human, but sometimes seeing the island more clearly is enough to help you take one small step toward it. Because procrastination is not simply about laziness or time management. It is about the way your brain bends time itself, shrinking tomorrow until it feels disposable. To break free, you must learn to make the future real, to let its voice speak as loudly as the present. And yet, even as you learn to hear the future more clearly, there is another hidden weight pressing on your choices, the sheer overload of the present. Too many paths, too many options, too much information. Sometimes you don't delay because the reward is too far away. You delay because you don't know where to begin. That is the next layer we must enter, the paralyzing effect of too many choices, and how cognitive overload fuels the cycle of delay. Imagine walking into a supermarket with one goal: buy a jar of jam. You expect a simple choice, maybe strawberry or grape, but instead you find yourself before a towering wall of shelves, lined with 40 flavors: raspberry with lavender, mango chili, apricot honey, blueberry with pomegranate. The shelves are dazzling, colorful, overwhelming. What happens? Instead of feeling empowered, you freeze. You stand staring, unable to decide, and sometimes you leave with nothing at all. This is not just a quirk of shopping. It is a glimpse into what psychologists call choice overload. The mind, when faced with too many options, often struggles not only to decide, but even to begin. And this same principle fuels procrastination. When your task involves multiple steps, open-ended paths, or infinite possibilities of how to start, your brain recoils. The prefrontal cortex, the planner, is suddenly weighed down, while the limbic system whispers escape. 1,000 options collapse into one: delay. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. You sit down to write. Should you outline first, or dive into a draft? Should you research more, or refine what you already have? Each option branches into others, and soon the tree of possibility is so dense you cannot even take the first step. You tell yourself, "I'll start later, when I'm clearer." But clarity rarely arrives on its own. Neuroscience reveals why this paralysis occurs. Your working memory, the mental space where you juggle ideas, can only hold a few items at once. When you overload it with choices, it becomes strained, like a desk cluttered with papers, until no surface is left clear. In this state, even simple decisions feel exhausting. The brain seeks relief, and the fastest path to relief is avoidance. Delay is not laziness, it is the mind seeking to reduce overload. This is why tasks that feel vague, write a report, get healthy, plan a trip, are especially prone to procrastination. They contain too many undefined steps. Your brain craves specificity, and without it, the options swirl endlessly. It is easier to open a browser tab than to sort the tangle of possibilities. To make this more vivid, imagine standing at the entrance of a dense forest. Somewhere inside is a path to your goal, but the trees branch in every direction. You could try left, right, straight, or back again. Each path looks both promising and uncertain. The effort of choosing feels heavier than the effort of walking, and so you do not walk at all. That is cognitive overload, the weight of too many beginnings. Researchers once tested this in a famous study. At a market, one table offered 6 flavors of jam to sample, while another offered 24. Shoppers were more likely to approach the larger display, but far more likely to actually purchase when offered fewer choices. Too many options attracted curiosity, but paralyzed action. The lesson echoes far beyond jam. When your mind faces a task with too many possible entry points, it freezes. Now consider how this interacts with procrastination. You might genuinely want to begin, but your brain whispers, which way first? What if I choose wrong? What if I waste effort? The uncertainty compounds the overload, and the simplest escape is postponement. Later feels safer, not because you will be more capable tomorrow, but because the decision feels too heavy now. Philosophically, this mirrors a broader human dilemma. Freedom without boundaries can paralyze. We imagine that more options bring more happiness, but often the opposite occurs. Without limits, without clarity, the self becomes scattered. Choice is power, but too much choice is weight. And procrastination is sometimes the body's way of setting down that weight, if only temporarily. Think of times when you acted quickly and decisively. Often the path was simple, one clear step forward, no branching uncertainty. Send this message, wash this dish. The brain thrives on clarity. Each time you strip a task down to its simplest beginning, you remove the fog of overload. That is why micro-actions, as we will see later, can be so powerful. They collapse the forest of choices into a single step. But before solutions, reflect on the feeling itself. Choice overload is not just mental, it is visceral. Your chest may tighten, your thoughts may scatter, your body may resist. Delay then becomes not only a cognitive escape, but also an emotional shield. If you do not begin, you do not have to face the weight of choosing among countless paths, and so procrastination becomes a strange comfort, a pause that spares you from the pain of decision. Yet this comfort comes with a cost. The task remains, looming larger each day, and the forest grows denser the longer you wait. What could have been a single path now feels like a labyrinth. The longer you delay, the heavier the load becomes, until action feels impossible. Still, awareness begins to shift this. Once you name the weight as overload, rather than laziness, you see it differently. You can begin to ask, what is the smallest path I can clear? What single option can I choose? Not forever, but just for now. The moment you shrink the field of choices, the brain breathes easier and hesitation loosens its grip. So procrastination here is not a defect of will, but a side effect of too much freedom without direction. To overcome it, you need not force yourself harder, but simplify the terrain, narrow the forest into a single trail. Let the first step be obvious, even trivial. Because once you take that step, momentum builds. The mind, freed from overload, shifts from paralysis to flow. And this shift is crucial, because while overload paralyzes, there is another emotion that fuels delay in an even deeper way: fear. Fear that the path you choose will expose weakness. Fear that beginning means risking failure. Fear that the task is not just heavy, but threatening. This is the next layer, where procrastination reveals itself not just as overload, but as avoidance of danger. And so, from the crowded shelf of jam, we must move into the shadows of anxiety, and see how fear disguises itself as delay. Imagine standing at the edge of a cold swimming pool. You know you'll feel better once you're in, that the shock will pass, and the water will even become pleasant. Yet your body resists. Your toes curl at the edge, your chest tightens, and a voice inside whispers, "Not yet, maybe later." What keeps you frozen is not the pool itself, but the anticipation of discomfort. This is how fear works within procrastination. The task in front of you is not only effortful, your brain interprets it as a possible threat. Science shows that procrastination often functions less as laziness and more as emotional avoidance. When faced with a task that stirs anxiety, fear of failure, uncertainty about outcomes, or even boredom, the brain activates its threat detection circuits. Deep within, the amygdala, a small almond-shaped cluster, lights up. Its role is to scan for danger and mobilize you to respond. But when the danger is not a predator but a spreadsheet, a canvas, or an essay, the response misfires. Instead of fighting or fleeing in the physical world, you flee into distraction, you delay. This reaction is powerful because it recruits your body as well. Stress hormones like cortisol rise when you think about a daunting task. Your heart rate shifts, your breathing changes. Procrastination becomes the nervous system's attempt to calm itself. By avoiding the task, you reduce the stress signals, at least temporarily. The irony, of course, is that the stress returns stronger later, creating a vicious loop. Consider a common scenario. You postpone starting a report because you fear it won't be good enough. In the moment of avoidance, your anxiety drops. your brain rewards you with a sense of relief. That relief is real, tangible. But hours later, as the deadline looms, the anxiety returns doubled. Your brain has learned a dangerous lesson. Delay reduces fear. Do it again. This is why procrastination repeats. It's not just a habit. It's reinforced by cycles of fear and temporary relief. Psychologists call this the avoidance cycle. At its core is the amygdala's role in exaggerating the emotional weight of tasks. Functional MRI studies reveal that individuals who procrastinate more show greater amygdala activity when imagining their responsibilities. Their brains treat ordinary tasks as more threatening, and so avoidance feels protective. But the brain doesn't act alone. The limbic system, home to the amygdala, competes with the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for regulating fear, weighing evidence, and keeping long-term goals in view. When fear surges, the amygdala can override the cortex, silencing logic in favor of escape. You might know writing a single paragraph won't harm you, but fear still drives your hand to click away, to turn on a video, to postpone. Knowledge alone is not enough. The emotional circuitry must be calmed. Philosophically, this reveals something tender. Procrastination is often an act of self-protection. When you delay, you are not rejecting your goals. You are shielding yourself from a perceived wound. You fear that beginning will expose imperfection, that effort will reveal inadequacy, that the outcome will not match the vision in your mind. Delay, then, is a way of telling yourself, not yet, I'm not ready to feel that pain. Think of an artist staring at a blank canvas. The emptiness is not just paper, it is the possibility of disappointment, the fear that what emerges will not match the beauty imagined. To delay is to preserve the dream intact, unspoiled by reality. In this sense, procrastination can be seen as an act of hope, twisted into avoidance. You postpone because you care too much, not too little. Experiments have confirmed this link between anxiety and procrastination. In studies where participants rated their emotional response to tasks, those with higher task-related anxiety were far more likely to delay starting. One experiment even showed that perfectionistic individuals who feared mistakes most intensely delayed more than others. Their procrastination wasn't a lack of standards, it was the weight of standards so high that starting felt unsafe. Reflect on how this resonates your own life. Have you ever avoided opening an email because you feared its contents, or postponed a conversation because the possibility of conflict loomed? In each case, the delay wasn't laziness, it was fear disguised as waiting. Your amygdala whispered stay safe, and your body obeyed. Yet while fear fuels procrastination, it also offers a clue to transformation. If you recognize that delay is a shield, you can begin to lower it gently. This doesn't mean forcing yourself through fear, but softening it. Simple practices, like breaking tasks into small, less intimidating steps, reduce the amygdala's alarm. When the task feels smaller, the threat diminishes and the prefrontal cortex regains its voice. Another tool is reappraisal, consciously reframing how you see the task. Instead of "this project might expose my weakness," you tell yourself, "this is a chance to explore, to learn, to experiment." Neuroscience shows that reappraisal activates the prefrontal cortex, calming the amygdala and shifting emotional tone. By changing the story, you change the brain's response. And there is compassion. Many studies suggest that self-compassion reduces procrastination more effectively than harsh self-criticism. When you meet your fear with kindness, saying, "It's natural to feel anxious, but I can still try," the amygdala's activation lessens. The brain interprets the task as less threatening when you treat yourself as an ally rather than an enemy. Pause here and imagine again that pool. The water is cold, yes, but you do not have to dive in head first. You can dip a toe, splash your hands, ease yourself inch by inch. Each small movement tells your brain, "I am safe enough to continue," and soon what was once fear becomes flow. So the next time you find yourself delaying, try not to ask, "Why am I lazy?" but rather, "What am I afraid of, and how can I soothe that fear?" That question reframes procrastination, not as a flaw, but as a message, a signal from your amygdala that can be answered with clarity, with gentleness, with small beginnings. Because fear may disguise itself as delay, but beneath it lies a longing for safety. And when you learn to give your brain that safety in healthy ways, the cycle begins to shift. Yet fear has a close companion that deepens procrastination further: perfectionism. If fear says, "Don't start, it might hurt," perfectionism whispers, "Don't start unless it can be flawless." And together they weave a trap that holds you still. That is where we must go next, into the paradox of perfectionism, and how the pursuit of flawlessness becomes the most powerful engine of delay. Imagine standing before a blank page. The paper is flawless, unmarked, a pure surface holding infinite possibility. You lift your pen but hesitate. In your mind, the first word must be perfect, the sentence must capture brilliance, the page must mirror the beauty of your vision. And so you pause. Minutes pass. The page remains untouched. What holds you back is not lack of ideas, but the crushing weight of wanting them to be flawless. This is the paradox of perfectionism. The higher your standards, the more likely you are to delay. Far from fueling productivity, perfectionism often paralyzes it. At its core, procrastination is not about doing nothing. It is about doing nothing yet, because doing something imperfect feels unbearable. Neuroscience sheds light on why perfectionism links so tightly with procrastination. When you anticipate a task, the amygdala once again plays its role, generating anxiety at the possibility of failure. But in perfectionists, studies show heightened activity in this fear circuit, coupled with overactivation in parts of the prefrontal cortex responsible for error monitoring. It is as if the brain becomes hypervigilant, scanning constantly for mistakes before they even occur. The result, you avoid starting to avoid the possibility of error. One striking experiment asked university students to complete writing assignments under time pressure. Those who scored higher in perfectionism scales consistently delayed starting. Their reasoning was not laziness, but fear. Fear that the draft would fall short. Fear that imperfection would expose inadequacy. Brain imaging research echoes this. Perfectionists show stronger connectivity between error detection regions and emotional circuits. Their brains amplify the sting of potential mistakes, making inaction feel safer than imperfect action. Think of perfectionism as a glass cage. From within, you see the world clearly, but you dare not step outside for fear of cracking the glass. The illusion is safety. As long as you do not act, your imagined ideal remains intact. But the price is stasis. The dream stays perfect only because it never risks becoming real. Philosophically, this creates a deep human dilemma. The things we most long to create, books, relationships, art, careers, are also the things we most long to preserve as perfect in imagination. To begin is to risk diminishing them. To act is to prove we are fallible. And so perfectionism, which seems like a devotion to excellence, becomes a devotion to delay. Notice how this shows up in small ways. You tell yourself you'll start cleaning once you have enough time to do it thoroughly. You'll begin exercising once you can follow the ideal plan without missing a day. You'll write once the outline is flawless. Each condition postpones the start, because the standard is impossible. You are waiting not for time, but for perfection itself, a guest that never arrives. The irony is that the brain actually thrives on imperfection. Neuroplasticity, the ability of your brain to rewire itself, depends on trial, error, and gradual improvement. Learning circuits in the striatum and motor cortex fire more during mistakes than successes. Progress emerges not from flawlessness, but from feedback. Yet the perfectionist brain, hijacked by fear, avoids precisely the experiences that enable growth. Reflect on the paradox here. Your brain evolved to adapt through imperfection, yet perfectionism tricks it into paralysis. This is why procrastination often feels so heavy. It pits your biology for learning against your psychology of fear. But perfectionism is not only biological, it is cultural. Many of us are raised with praise tied to achievement rather than effort. You got an A, you're smart. You won, you're talented. The message seeps in. Mistakes mean you are less. This conditioning strengthens the fear circuits, teaching the brain to equate error with identity. Over time, perfectionism becomes a shield to protect the self-image at all costs. Consider also how perfectionism interacts with memory. Psychologists have found that perfectionists remember failures more vividly than successes. The hippocampus, our memory's archivist, seems biased to store the sting of imperfection. This creates a feedback loop. Past errors feel sharper, future ones loom larger, and the present becomes a place of avoidance. And yet, there is another side to the story. Not all perfectionism is harmful. Researchers distinguish between adaptive perfectionism, where high standards motivate effort, and maladaptive perfectionism, where fear of mistakes fuels paralysis. The former can sharpen focus, the latter corrodes it. The difference lies in how the brain interprets error, as a teacher or as a threat. So how do you shift from paralysis to progress? One key lies in reframing imperfection. Instead of viewing mistakes as cracks in your identity, you see them as stepping stones in your brain's growth. Neuroimaging studies show that self-compassion practices literally quiet error monitoring regions, reducing the amygdala's grip and making it easier to begin. By telling yourself it's human to stumble, you reduce the emotional weight of the first step. Another strategy is to shrink the size of beginnings. When the task looms as a perfect whole, the amygdala sounds its alarm. But if you break it into micro-actions, open the file, write one sentence, the threat diminishes. Each small success sends dopamine upward, gently rewiring the brain to associate action with safety rather than danger. Pause for a moment and imagine your own blank page, your own unstarted task. Notice the voice that says, "Not yet, it must be better than this." Then imagine answering it with a softer voice. Let it be imperfect. Let it simply exist. That permission cracks the glass cage. Philosophically, imperfection is what makes creation alive. A flawless pearl locked in imagination remains untouched, sterile. But a rough stone shaped by time, error, and persistence becomes something real, something that carries the texture of humanity. To demand perfection is to demand silence. To accept imperfection is to allow music. So when procrastination whispers later, listen closely. Sometimes it is not fear of work, but fear of flaw. Sometimes you are not lazy but careful, guarding a dream too tender to risk, but dreams breathe only when risked. And as you hold this paradox, notice how it links back to the cycle itself. Fear feeds delay, perfectionism magnifies fear, and delay offers false relief. To break the cycle, we must see it for what it is, not a sign of weakness, but of caring too much, of longing for excellence so deeply it hurts to begin. Yet perfectionism is only one loop in the machinery. Beneath it lies a deeper rhythm, a pattern that repeats every time you delay. Intention, postponement, relief, guilt, and return. This is the delay loop, and to understand procrastination fully, we must see how this loop traps you in its circular dance. Picture this familiar scene. You wake up with the firm intention to begin your task. You imagine yourself working smoothly, finishing on time, feeling the relief of completion. But instead, you check your phone, tidy your desk, prepare a coffee, maybe even open the file, but then drift into something else. Hours later, the task is untouched. You promise yourself, "I'll start after lunch." Lunch comes, and you repeat, "I'll start tonight." Finally, night falls, and guilt arrives heavier than the task itself. You go to sleep, whispering tomorrow. This is the delay loop, the repeating cycle, at the heart of procrastination. It unfolds in predictable stages. 1. Intention, the genuine desire to act. 2. Avoidance, slipping into distraction to escape discomfort. Relief, the temporary calm that avoidance brings. 4. Guilt, the recognition of delay, and the sting of self-reproach. 5. Renewed intention, a new promise to begin tomorrow. Then the loop restarts. Neuroscientists have observed that this cycle is not merely psychological, it is embedded in the brain's reward and threat circuits. At the first step, intention, the prefrontal cortex activates. This region sets goals, plans, and imagines the benefits of achievement. But when the task triggers discomfort, uncertainty, boredom, or fear, the amygdala and limbic system light up, sending signals of avoidance. In that moment, if you turn to a distraction, social media, food, cleaning, dopamine surges. You feel a wave of relief. Functional MRI studies show that during avoidance, the brain's ventral striatum, a hub of reward processing, becomes active, as if you've chosen something beneficial. The relief is real and chemically reinforced. Your brain learns escaping the task feels good. But then comes the cost. Hours later, when you remember the task undone, the anterior cingulate cortex, a region linked to error detection and conflict monitoring, activates. This part of the brain notices the mismatch between intention and action. You feel guilt, frustration, sometimes shame. These emotions are not abstract. They are neurochemical storms, with cortisol rising and stress circuits firing. Ironically, guilt often strengthens the loop instead of breaking it. Why? Because guilt itself is uncomfortable, and the brain, still seeking relief, avoids the task again. Thus, the cycle repeats. One study at the University of Sheffield followed students over a semester. Researchers found that procrastination wasn't just a one-time choice. It was a pattern. Students reported repeated cycles of intention and delay, with guilt intensifying over time. Those caught in the strongest loops showed higher cortisol levels before deadlines and poorer sleep quality. Procrastination became not just a habit, but a physiological burden. Think of the delay loop like a carousel. Each time you try to step off, it pulls you back into rotation. The music is soothing for a moment, but as it repeats endlessly, you grow dizzy, exhausted, trapped. Philosophically, this loop reflects the human struggle with freedom and responsibility. To promise action is to bind yourself to your own word. To delay is to break that bond, and the guilt is the echo of that fracture. The loop is less about laziness and more about the fragile trust between you and yourself. Each repetition chips at that trust. But the brain's plasticity also means the loop can be rewired. Researchers have tested interventions that disrupt the cycle. For example, when participants broke tasks into extremely small steps, so small they seemed trivial, the prefrontal cortex could carry intention into action without triggering amygdala resistance. Even writing a single sentence or opening a document changed the brain's feedback. Dopamine released not from avoidance, but from progress. This created a new loop: intention, reaction, reward, momentum. Another approach is implementation intentions, studied by psychologist Peter Gollwitzer. These are if-then plans, such as if it's 7 p.m., I will open my laptop. Imaging studies show that such specific cues recruit the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, making it easier to override limbic impulses. In practice, these tiny scripts give the brain fewer opportunities to slip into delay. And self-compassion plays a role too. In a Canadian study, students who forgave themselves for procrastinating on the first exam procrastinated less for the second. Their brains, no longer drowning in guilt, could reset and act. This suggests that breaking the loop is less about punishment and more about releasing shame. Reflect on how this resonates with your own life. How many times have you sworn, tomorrow will be different? How often has guilt made you harsher with yourself, only to fuel another cycle? The delay loop is not proof of weakness. It is proof of how deeply your brain craves relief. The key is not to fight the loop with force, but to rewire it gently by making beginning smaller, rewards closer, and self-talk kinder. Pause and imagine your own carousel. Notice its pull, the music of distraction, the dizziness of delay. Then imagine stepping off, not with a leap, but with a single small step onto the ground. That step might be opening a book, writing one line, making one call. The loop wavers, the cycle stutters. In that moment, the carousel slows. And yet, knowing the loop is not enough. You need strategies to shift inertia into momentum. You need to learn how the smallest beginnings can hack the cycle. This leads us to the next key, the power of micro-actions, and how breaking tasks into their tiniest forms can free the brain from its endless dance. Picture a giant boulder resting at the base of a hill. You know it must be moved, but the sheer weight of it overwhelms you. Standing there, staring, you feel paralyzed. Yet imagine instead of trying to heave the entire mass at once, you place your shoulder against it and nudge just enough to shift it an inch. The boulder moves, even slightly, and in that instant momentum begins. This is the secret of micro-actions, the smallest possible steps that break inertia and open the path forward. From the perspective of neuroscience, this works because of the way the brain processes thresholds. There exists what researchers call the activation energy of a task, the psychological barrier that must be crossed before action begins. Tasks that feel large, vague, or unpleasant have a high threshold, triggering the amygdala's alarm and inviting avoidance. But micro-actions lower the threshold. By reframing the task into something so small it feels almost trivial, the amygdala stays quiet, and the prefrontal cortex can guide you forward. Consider the 2-minute rule, popularized in behavioral science. Commit only to starting a task for 2 minutes. Write a single sentence, tie your running shoes, open the document. Once the brain experiences the action, inertia shifts. Dopamine is released not only for finishing but for starting, as the striatum, the brain's habit center, recognizes progress. Research at Stanford has shown that when people begin tasks in tiny increments, they are far more likely to continue because the hardest part was never the doing, but the starting. One study on procrastination and exercise found that when participants were asked simply to put on their gym clothes rather than commit to a full workout, they were twice as likely to actually exercise. The act of starting, however small, bypassed the amygdala's resistance. Once the shoes were tied, the workout often followed. The same applies to writing, cleaning, studying, or creating. The brain is less resistant to beginnings when they appear small and safe. Imagine your task as a locked door. Trying to force it open with sheer will feels impossible. But a micro-action is like turning the key just enough to hear the first click. Once the mechanism shifts, the rest follows with less effort. The click is what the brain craves. It signals movement, and movement feeds momentum. Philosophically, this reveals a profound truth. Greatness is not the product of giant leaps, but of small, repeated steps. The myth of sudden transformation keeps people waiting for perfect conditions, while reality is built from ordinary beginnings. Micro-actions honor imperfection and reality. They allow you to meet yourself where you are instead of where you think you should be. Reflect on this in your own life. How many times have you avoided a task for hours, only to find that once you began, even with a single small step, the resistance dissolved? The page fills after the first sentence. The room looks cleaner after folding one shirt. Momentum creates its own energy. The brain rewards action, however small, with a chemical nudge to continue. Neuroscientists describe this as a shift in the dopaminergic loop. Normally, dopamine surges when you choose distraction, reinforcing delay. But when you complete a micro-action, the same circuit lights up for progress. You train your brain to associate relief not with avoidance, but with action. Over time, this rewiring makes starting easier and procrastination weaker. Another scientific anchor lies in friction theory. Every task contains points of friction, small resistances that make starting harder. Searching for a pen, finding a document, clearing a space. Studies in behavioral economics show that even tiny obstacles reduce the likelihood of action. By reducing friction, laying out clothes before bed, keeping a notebook open, Placing tools within reach, you lower the activation energy. The task feels lighter, and the brain is more likely to comply. There's also the principle of successive approximation, rooted in behavioral psychology. Rather than leaping to the final goal, you move step by step, rewarding each approximation. Therapists use this technique to help patients overcome phobias. Someone terrified of spiders may first look at a picture, then watch a video, then approach a jar with one inside. Each micro step reshapes the brain's fear response. Procrastination works the same way. You don't leap into the whole project. You approach it gently, piece by piece, until the task loses its threat. Now, pause and picture yourself facing your own boulder, the report, the essay, the project. Instead of asking, "How do I finish this entire mountain?" ask, "What is the smallest movement I can make right now?" Perhaps it is opening a file, writing the title, setting a timer for 2 minutes. These tiny actions are the cracks in the wall of inertia. Once light seeps through, momentum grows. Philosophically, micro-actions also teach humility. They remind you that progress does not require heroism, only willingness. They honor the reality of the present self, who may not be ready for everything, but is always ready for something. And in honoring that, you build trust with yourself, step by step. Trust is essential, because procrastination erodes it. Each broken promise, "I'll do it tonight, tomorrow, this weekend," weakens the bond with yourself. Micro-actions repair that bond. When you say, "I'll do just this small thing," and you follow through, your brain learns to believe you again. That belief, more than any system or hack, is the foundation of change. So micro-actions are more than tricks. They are neurological bridges, psychological healing, and philosophical lessons. They lower thresholds, redirect dopamine, reduce friction, and rebuild self-trust. They are the way out of the delay loop, not through force, but through gentleness. But to sustain them, you must also learn to design your environment in ways that favor action over avoidance. Because even the smallest steps can falter if your surroundings constantly pull you toward distraction. The brain is not just a private battlefield. It is shaped by the cues and landscapes around you. And so to understand procrastination more deeply, we must now turn to environmental design. How the spaces you inhabit either amplify delay or invite momentum. Imagine entering a room where everything around you whispers instructions to your brain. A glowing screen hums with possibility. A stack of papers reminds you of unfinished duties. An open bag of snacks tempts you with comfort. You may think you act from willpower alone, but neuroscience shows otherwise. Your environment constantly shapes your behavior, sometimes invisibly, sometimes irresistibly. And when it comes to procrastination, your surroundings can either become a trap or a ladder. This is the essence of environmental design. The understanding that the brain is exquisitely sensitive to cues. The hippocampus, a structure that encodes context, links environments to habits. Walk into a kitchen and eating feels natural. Sit on a couch and rest beckons. Open a browser and scrolling follows almost automatically. This is not weakness, it is conditioning. Your brain builds associations between places, objects, and behaviors, making them automatic triggers. Experiments in psychology have shown this clearly. In one classic study, people were offered candy in 2 different bowls, one clear, one opaque. Though the candies were identical, participants ate significantly more from the transparent bowl. Why? Because visibility itself was a cue. The brain is biased toward what is salient, what is present. In procrastination, this bias often means distractions are easier to start than meaningful work, simply because they are in sight. From a neural perspective, this reflects the way the dopaminergic system responds to cues. The mere sight of a tempting object, like a phone, activates the ventral striatum, releasing dopamine in anticipation of the pleasure to come. The task you need to do may also bring rewards, but if its cues are hidden or abstract, it doesn't trigger the same surge. The environment tilts the chemical balance. pushing you toward delay. Think of this like gravity. A ball rolls downhill, not because it dislikes the top, but because the slope pulls it. Likewise, you drift into procrastination, not because you lack discipline, but because your environment tilts toward distraction. The trick is not to fight gravity, but to reshape the slope. One way to do this is reducing friction for good habits. Studies show that when tasks are made easier to begin, fewer clicks, fewer steps, people engage more. For example, researchers at Cornell University found that office workers ate fewer sweets when candy jars were placed 6 feet away instead of on their desks. That tiny bit of friction lowered consumption drastically. Translate this to work, keeping your workspace clear, opening the needed file beforehand, or leaving notes for yourself makes action feel effortless. The reverse is also true. Increase friction for distractions. Logging out of apps, silencing notifications, or placing your phone in another room raises the activation energy for avoidance. Neuroscience explains why this works. Each extra step dampens the limbic system's impulse, giving the prefrontal cortex time to intervene. Delay the distraction by seconds, and the craving often fades. Philosophically, this invites reflection on freedom. We think freedom is unlimited choice, but in practice, freedom often requires constraints. By designing your environment to limit harmful options, you create conditions where your better intentions can thrive. The paradox is that constraints can liberate. Reflect on your own space. Is your desk a stage for focus or for distraction? Do your tools for meaningful work sit ready, or are they buried beneath cues for delay? Imagine entering a room where the first thing you see is your project open, a notebook waiting, a pen placed carefully. That visual cue alone can tilt your brain toward progress. There is also the matter of temporal environment, not just space, but time. Your brain encodes rhythms, associating certain hours with certain behaviors. If you repeatedly watch shows at night, the evening becomes a cue for entertainment. If you study each morning, that hour becomes a cue for focus. This is why routines are powerful. They turn time itself into an ally. The basal ganglia, which store habits, fire more strongly when behaviors are linked to consistent contexts. One experiment from MIT showed that rats running mazes developed strong neural firing patterns whenever they reached a familiar decision point. The brain used environmental cues to trigger stored routines. Humans do the same. When procrastination becomes tied to a place or time, the brain automatically loops. But when you alter the context, change your workspace, shift the hour, you disrupt the cue and open a chance for new habits. Consider too how environments reflect identity. The objects around you are not neutral, they signal who you are becoming. A guitar in the corner is a reminder of music waiting. A stack of unopened books whispers of learning postponed. Each object is both physical and psychological, a mirror of intention and avoidance. To redesign your space is to redesign the story you are telling yourself about your life. Philosophically, this is powerful. It suggests that procrastination is not just an inner battle of willpower, but an outer dialogue with the world you build. You shape your surroundings, and they in turn shape you. Every environment is a negotiation between your present self and your future self. So pause and ask, what in your space today serves the loop of delay, and what serves the flow of momentum? What could be removed, hidden, or relocated to weaken distraction? What could be placed closer, brighter, or readier to amplify action? Because while the brain contains the circuits of procrastination, the environment holds the levers. Small changes, moving a phone, setting a timer, preparing your desk, are not trivial. They are neurological engineering. They reshape the slope of gravity, letting effort roll downhill instead of up. Yet even with these tools, another voice often rises, the voice of shame. You look at the undone work, the messy room, the wasted time, and you turn against yourself. Shame promises to whip you into action, but more often it deepens avoidance. To break procrastination fully, we must now face this hidden companion, guilt's heavier sibling, and see why only self-compassion, not shame, can quiet the cycle. You sit at your desk, the work untouched, and a heavy feeling spreads in your chest. It is not only the weight of the task, but the weight of your own judgment. You whisper to yourself, "Why can't I just do it? What's wrong with me?" This is shame, the quiet shadow that often follows procrastination. And though it feels like punishment meant to push you forward, neuroscience shows it usually drags you deeper into delay. To understand why, let's return to the brain. Shame activates a wide network that includes the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors conflict and errors, and the insula, which processes the painful sting of social rejection. From an evolutionary perspective, shame evolved to keep humans aligned with the tribe. To be cast out meant danger, even death. But when shame is directed inward, it makes the self feel like the enemy. Instead of spurring action, it overwhelms the nervous system, leading to withdrawal and avoidance. Functional MRI studies confirm this. When people recall moments of deep shame, their brains light up in regions associated with pain. The experience is not metaphorical, it hurts physically. And when you associate that pain with a task you've avoided, the task itself becomes tainted with threat. The amygdala strengthens its alarm, whispering, "Stay away." The result, you procrastinate more. This explains why cycles of self-criticism rarely work. You scold yourself, thinking harsh words will motivate you. Instead, the emotional brain links the task with shame, making it even harder to face next time. Psychologists call this the shame avoidance spiral. Each delay breeds shame, which fuels more delay, until the task is buried under layers of self-disgust. Contrast this with self-compassion. Studies from the University of British Columbia found that students who forgave themselves for procrastinating before one exam were significantly less likely to procrastinate before the next. Self-compassion does not remove responsibility. It simply reduces the emotional sting, allowing the prefrontal cortex to re-engage. When guilt is met with kindness instead of shame, the brain perceives the task as less threatening, and action becomes possible again. Imagine two teachers. One berates a student for every mistake, shouting, "You'll never get it right." The other leans down and says, "It's okay to stumble, let's try again." Which student learns more? Your brain is that student, and shame versus compassion are the teachers. Harshness may feel like discipline, but in reality, compassion wires the circuits for resilience. Philosophically, this opens a deeper reflection. Shame is the voice of perfectionism disguised as morality. It tells you that worth is conditional, that you must earn belonging by flawless action. Compassion tells another story, that you are already worthy and that your efforts are expressions of care, not proofs of value. Choosing compassion is not weakness, it is alignment with the truth that growth is born from imperfection. Think of the last time you procrastinated and scolded yourself harshly. Did the words lazy, useless, hopeless actually help you move? Or did they sink you further? Now imagine instead you had said, "Of course this is hard, I'm afraid, but I can still take one small step." That shift might have changed everything. Neuroscience supports this. Self-compassion practices activate the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, an area linked to emotional regulation and safety. They also reduce activity in the amygdala, calming threat responses. In other words, compassion doesn't excuse you, it equips you. It lowers the emotional barrier so you can act. The paradox is striking. Shame, which feels like the voice of discipline, undermines action. Compassion, which feels soft, actually strengthens it. This is why cultures and individuals trapped in cycles of shame often struggle with procrastination more deeply. They carry emotional burdens that cloud the path to progress. Reflect too on how shame shapes identity. When you procrastinate, shame whispers, "I am a procrastinator." The self becomes fused with the behavior. Compassion, by contrast, says, I procrastinated, but that is not who I am. The first seals identity in stone. The second leaves room for change. This reframing matters profoundly. The brain's sense of identity, housed in networks across the medial prefrontal cortex, influences behavior strongly. If you believe you are a procrastinator, the brain seeks consistency with that identity. If you believe procrastination is a behavior, not your essence, you are free to shift. Compassion creates that opening. Pause here and breathe. Think of a task you've delayed. Feel the weight of shame it carries. Then gently imagine speaking to yourself as you would to a close friend. You're human. You're trying. One step is enough. Notice how the emotional texture changes, the task softens, the resistance eases. That is not indulgence. It is neuroscience in action. So when the cycle of procrastination threatens to drown you in shame, remember, harshness deepens the spiral. Compassion breaks it. Each time you choose kindness toward yourself, you loosen the grip of the emotional brain and allow the rational brain to lead. But even as shame and compassion shape your inner landscape, procrastination exacts another hidden toll, time itself. Each delay is not only an emotional burden, but also a cognitive one. Tasks left undone consume memory, attention, and mood in ways science is only beginning to reveal. To fully grasp procrastination's cost, we must now examine how delay reshapes the very architecture of thought. Picture a desk with a single envelope placed upon it. You know what's inside: a bill, a decision, a task waiting for you. You tell yourself you'll open it later, but notice what happens. The envelope sits quietly, yet it weighs on your mind. You think of it while making coffee. You remember it when you try to relax. Though unopened, it is not silent. It hums faintly in your thoughts, like a low electrical buzz that never stops. This is the hidden cost of procrastination. Not just lost hours, but the cognitive load of tasks left unfinished. Neuroscience reveals that incomplete intentions linger in memory, occupying mental space long after you set them aside. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect, discovered when waiters remembered unpaid orders more vividly than completed ones. Once an order was served, the memory faded, but while it remained incomplete, it stayed active in the brain. Procrastinated tasks work the same way. They remain open loops that drain attention. Brain imaging shows that unfinished goals activate the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the very region you need for focus and planning. It is as though a portion of your mental desk remains cluttered with reminders of the undone. Each time you delay, you are not resting. You are multitasking with ghosts of the future. This explains why procrastination often feels exhausting even when you have done nothing. Your brain continues to juggle the task in the background, consuming working memory. Cortisol levels rise, not because you are active, but because you are haunted. Avoidance provides short-term relief, but exacts long-term fatigue. Consider the effect on mood. Studies have found that chronic procrastinators report higher levels of stress, guilt, and even depression. One longitudinal study showed that students who delayed assignments experienced increased illness and weaker immune responses near deadlines. The body carries the weight of delay as surely as the mind. Procrastination is not rest, it is tension stretched thin. Philosophically, this reveals a quiet tragedy. Time is not only lost in hours of avoidance, it is lost in the quality of the hours that remain. The present becomes clouded by the shadow of the unfinished. Joy in leisure is tainted by guilt. Focus in work is fractured by reminders. To procrastinate is to scatter your life across moments that never fully belong to you. Reflect on your own experience. Have you ever postponed a task, only to find it coloring your mood for days? You may have laughed, rested, even worked on other things. Yet in the background, the undone hummed on. It is as though your future self keeps knocking on the door of your present, asking, "When will you let me exist?" Neuroscience also shows that the brain struggles to accurately measure the weight of future costs. The orbitofrontal cortex, which evaluates rewards and punishments, discounts the future heavily. The unpaid bill, the unfinished report, seems less urgent until the deadline approaches. Yet the prefrontal cortex knows it must be done. The tug of war between present relief and future cost adds friction to every moment. One way to lighten this burden is to create closure cues. Even small signals of progress can reduce the Zeigarnik effect. Writing a partial outline, making a checklist, or setting a reminder moves the task from amorphous threat to concrete plan. The hippocampus encodes this structure, allowing the prefrontal cortex to store the plan safely rather than keeping it endlessly active. This is why lists feel relieving. They release memory from holding the whole picture. Another approach is mindfulness. When you pause to notice the buzzing weight of an unfinished task, you shift it from unconscious tension to conscious awareness. This engages the anterior cingulate cortex, helping you regulate the conflict rather than be ruled by it. By naming the weight, you sometimes lighten it. Pause and breathe here. Imagine your own envelope on the desk, unopened, waiting. Feel its hum in your chest. Now imagine writing just one word on it. Begun. You do not need to finish, only to start. Notice how even the thought of beginning softens the tension. That is the secret. The burden of procrastination is heavier than the task itself. Philosophically, this raises the question of how we want to spend our time. Do we wish to carry invisible weights that blur each hour, or to live hours that belong fully to themselves? To procrastinate is to mortgage the present to the future. To act, even imperfectly, is to free the present from debt. The hidden cost of delay, then, is not only deadlines missed or goals postponed. It is the erosion of mental clarity, the dull ache in mood, the scattering of self across unfinished futures. Each time you act, however small, you reclaim not just progress, but presence. And yet, beyond the individual weight, there lies a collective lesson. Experiments with starting show that the smallest beginnings ripple through mood, confidence, and performance. To understand procrastination fully, we must now explore these studies and see how science proves that action itself, however minimal, changes everything. Imagine a runner standing at the starting line, heart pounding, ready to leap forward. Yet when the signal sounds, instead of sprinting, they freeze, hesitating, second-guessing, tightening with self-doubt. It isn't that their body lacks strength, it's that their mind whispers, "What if I stumble? What if I'm not fast enough?" In this frozen moment, the enemy isn't the race, it's the judgment waiting if they fail. This is how perfectionism and self-criticism fuel procrastination, while self-compassion unlocks motion. We have already touched the shadows of shame, but here we explore how compassion rewires the brain in ways shame cannot. From a neuroscientific view, self-criticism amplifies the brain's threat circuits. When you berate yourself, the amygdala fires more strongly, cortisol floods your system, and the default mode network, the part of your brain that ruminates on the self, loops endlessly in negative cycles. Functional MRI studies show that chronic self-criticism lights up the same regions as physical pain, especially the insular and dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. You quite literally hurt yourself from the inside out. Now contrast this with self-compassion. Research from Kristen Neff and others has shown that when people practice self-kindness, brain scans reveal increased activity in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and striatum, areas linked to safety, reward, and motivation. Instead of bracing against imagined punishment, the brain relaxes into a state where effort feels less threatening. Dopamine is released, not because of external approval, but because kindness itself is rewarding. This has profound consequences for procrastination. When you delay a task, shame says, "You're weak, you're flawed." Compassion says, "Of course this is hard, but you can still try." The first voice chains you to inaction. The second frees you to move. In one experiment, university students were measured for procrastination before exams. Those who forgave themselves for earlier delays studied more for the next test. Their willingness to extend compassion broke the loop of avoidance. It wasn't willpower, it was gentleness that enabled resilience. Philosophically, compassion reframes the whole struggle. Procrastination ceases to be evidence of laziness and becomes evidence of humanity. It is the collision of fear, hope, and imperfection. To meet it with harshness is to deny your nature. To meet it with compassion is to embrace your humanity and act despite imperfection. Reflect here. Think of the last time you missed a deadline or postponed a goal. What did you say to yourself? Did the voice help, or did it wound? Now imagine another voice, softer, patient. Yes, you delayed, but you are not delay itself. Begin again. Which voice opens the door? Neuroscience confirms what philosophy intuits: self-compassion does not weaken responsibility, it strengthens it. When the brain feels safe, the prefrontal cortex regains control, planning and regulating behavior. When the brain feels threatened, it reverts to avoidance. Safety, paradoxically, is the soil from which discipline grows. There is also the matter of identity. Self-criticism fuses identity with behavior. I procrastinate, therefore I am a procrastinator. Compassion separates them. I procrastinated, but that is not who I am. The medial prefrontal cortex, which shapes self-concept, adapts accordingly. The story you tell yourself becomes the reality your brain encodes. Pause now and breathe. Imagine holding your procrastination in your hands, not as a monster to slay, but as a child afraid of failing. What would you say to soothe it? Perhaps you're afraid, but I am here. Let's try together. Feel how this changes the tension in your chest. This is not weakness. This is strategy. Philosophically, compassion reveals a paradox. True strength lies in softness. The whip of shame cracks loudly, but breaks trust. The hand of compassion is quiet, but builds courage. To move forward, the human brain needs less fear and more belonging. And who better to give that belonging than yourself? So next time you delay, notice the voice that rises. Choose carefully which teacher you will follow. Will it be the critic who chains you or the companion who frees you? The answer will shape not just your tasks, but your life. Yet even as compassion softens the emotional burden, procrastination still has practical costs that ripple through cognition and time. Unfinished work occupies memory, drains focus, and weighs on mood. To understand how deeply procrastination alters the architecture of thought, we must now turn to the hidden costs of delay, costs not only in hours lost, but in the mind itself. Imagine your mind as a computer desktop. Each unfinished task is not a file safely stored away, but an open window left running in the background. The more you postpone, the more windows accumulate, some blinking, some hidden, all consuming power. You may focus on one thing, but the processor lags. This is how procrastination eats away at your cognition, not only through time lost, but through mental clutter. Psychologists have long studied this phenomenon through what is called the Zeigarnik effect, the tendency of unfinished tasks to occupy memory more persistently than completed ones. In experiments, people remembered interrupted activities better than finished ones. Their brains held on to the unfinished as if refusing to let it go. From a neuroscience perspective, the hippocampus encodes these incomplete intentions, keeping them active in working memory networks. The result is a constant low-level distraction, even when you are not consciously thinking about the task. This lingering tension has real consequences. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning and focus, is a limited resource. Each open loop drains part of its bandwidth. When procrastination leaves tasks hanging, you walk through your day with a fraction of your clarity occupied by whispers of the undone. This is why even leisure feels less restful when important work is postponed. Your brain is multitasking between presence and absence. Studies confirm this cognitive toll. One experiment at Florida State University found that participants who were reminded of unfinished goals performed worse on subsequent tasks requiring working memory. Their mental desk was cluttered, reducing capacity for new challenges. Another study showed that students who procrastinated more often had increased anxiety, poorer sleep, and greater difficulty concentrating, even when they weren't working on the avoided task. Delay poisons focus beyond the boundaries of the task itself. From a biological standpoint, this makes sense. Unfinished goals keep the anterior cingulate cortex active, a region that monitors conflict. This constant hum signals to the body something is unresolved, something needs attention. Cortisol levels rise subtly, maintaining a background stress that lingers like static electricity. You may not feel it sharply, but it erodes calm, focus, and even immune function over time. Philosophically, this invites a sobering reflection. Procrastination does not merely steal your future, it dilutes your present. Each avoided action scatters fragments of your attention, leaving you less fully alive in the moment you are actually living. Leisure without presence is not true rest, and work without focus is not true progress. Delay corrodes both. Consider how this plays out in memory. When your mind is cluttered with undone tasks, it encodes fewer rich details of the present. Neuroscientists know that the hippocampus requires attentional space to consolidate experiences into long-term memory. When attention is fractured, memories are thinner. This means procrastination literally steals not just hours, but the depth of your lived experience. Days blur together, not because they lack events, but because you are never fully there to encode them. Pause here and reflect. Think of a time when you delayed something important for days or weeks. How did those days feel? Were they free, light, expansive, or did they feel heavy, shadowed, haunted by the silent presence of the undone? That heaviness was not laziness. It was the cost of carrying invisible weight across time. Yet there is also hope in this awareness. Just as unfinished tasks clutter cognition, completed tasks clear it. Experiments show that simply writing down a plan for how you will approach a task reduces the Zeigarnik effect. The brain feels reassured, the anterior cingulate relaxes, and attention is freed. This is why even small acts of progress feel disproportionately relieving. They signal closure, letting the brain release the loop. Philosophically, this means every act of starting is an act of liberation. Each time you break through procrastination, you reclaim not only time but presence, clarity, and memory. The undone no longer drains the now. Think of it this way: your brain is a garden of attention. Procrastination leaves weeds of unfinished intentions sprouting everywhere, stealing nutrients from the flowers of focus. Action, even in small doses, is the pruning that allows the garden to breathe again. So procrastination is not a neutral pause. It is a tax on cognition, a thinning of memory, a dimming of presence. To delay is to accept the buzzing static of the unfinished. To act is to restore silence, clarity, and depth. But the cost of procrastination is not only mental, it is also temporal. Each hour postponed is not only clutter in the mind but erosion in the future. To see the full picture, we must now turn to the economics of time, how procrastination warps the value of the present versus the future, and why our brains so often choose the smaller reward now over the greater reward later. Imagine you are offered two choices, $20 today or $30 a month from now. Most people, without hesitation, take the smaller sum today. Yet if the choice is reframed, $30 in a year or 31 in 13 months, suddenly the majority are willing to wait. This shift reveals one of the brain's deepest biases, temporal discounting, the tendency to devalue future rewards compared to immediate ones. This bias lies at the very heart of procrastination. When faced with a task that promises distant benefits, a degree earned, a project completed, a healthier body, the future reward feels abstract, almost unreal. Meanwhile, the pleasure of avoidance or distraction is immediate, tangible, and neurologically potent. The brain chooses now over later, again and again, even when it knows the future cost will be greater. Neuroscience explains this through the interplay of brain regions. The ventral striatum and limbic system light up strongly in response to immediate rewards, flooding the brain with dopamine. In contrast, the prefrontal cortex, which represents abstract, delayed outcomes, fires more weakly. Imaging studies show that when people make impulsive choices, their limbic circuitry dominates. When they manage to delay gratification, their prefrontal regions exert stronger control. Procrastination, then, is often the limbic system outshouting the prefrontal cortex. One famous experiment, the marshmallow test, illustrates this vividly. Children were given one marshmallow with the option to eat it immediately or wait and receive two later. Follow-up studies found that those who managed to wait tended to have better life outcomes decades later. Modern replications with brain imaging reveal that the ability to delay was linked to stronger prefrontal regulation, suppressing the limbic craving. The battle is not about marshmallows. It is about the architecture of time in the brain. Philosophically, this raises a profound question. How real is the future to us? Neuroscientists have found that when people imagine their future self, the brain often activates regions similar to when they think about strangers. In other words, your brain treats your future you as someone else entirely. This explains why promises to your future self are easy to break. They feel like promises to another person. Immediate pleasures belong to you. Future costs belong to someone else. Think of how this plays out in daily life. You skip studying tonight, telling yourself your future self will handle it. You spend rather than save, imagining the future you will somehow earn more. You eat the sweet, promising your future body will balance it out. This is not weakness, it is wiring. Your brain discounts the future as though it were foreign currency. Yet there are ways to counteract this bias. Experiments show that vividly imagining your future self, even looking at digitally aged photos of your own face, makes people more likely to save money and act responsibly. When the prefrontal cortex encodes the future as vivid and real, the limbic system loses its dominance. Similarly, connecting abstract tasks to immediate rewards, celebrating small wins, savoring progress helps bridge the gap between now and later. Another tool is what behavioral scientists call commitment devices. These are structures that bind your present self to protect your future self. Deadlines, accountability partners, financial stakes. Each of these harnesses the brain's sensitivity to immediate consequences and aligns it with long-term goals. By making delay costly now, you tip the scales back toward action. Pause for a moment and picture your own future self. 1 week, 1 year, 10 years from now. See them not as a stranger, but as someone you love, someone depending on you. Imagine their face, their tiredness, their gratitude if you act today. Neuroscience suggests this visualization strengthens the neural bridge between present and future selves, making the promise feel real. Philosophically, this reframing reveals something essential. Procrastination is not just a battle with time, but with identity. Each act of delay says, I do not yet belong to my future self. Each act of beginning says, I am already that person. The future is not waiting, it is unfolding from the smallest choices of the present. So procrastination thrives because the brain discounts the future and clings to the now. To act, we must make the future vivid, immediate, and connected to who we are. This shift changes the brain's calculus. The reward of progress now outweighs the fleeting relief of avoidance. And yet, even with these strategies, another obstacle remains: the sheer overload of choices. In a world of infinite options, deciding where to begin can paralyze as much as fear or temptation. To understand this, we must now explore the burden of cognitive overload and how too many paths can leave us frozen at the crossroads of action. Imagine standing in a supermarket aisle, lined with hundreds of cereals. Boxes stretch in every direction, bright colors, bold claims, endless variety. At first, the abundance feels empowering, but as you scan the labels, indecision creeps in. Should you choose health or taste? price or brand, novelty or familiarity. Minutes pass. Your brain, overwhelmed, begins to shut down. Ironically, you may leave the aisle without choosing at all. This is the paradox of choice, and it plays a powerful role in procrastination. When the brain faces too many options, ways to start a project, paths to finish, priorities to weigh, it becomes paralyzed. Instead of picking one, it delays. This is cognitive overload, the hidden friction that turns intention into hesitation. Neuroscience offers clear explanations. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the brain's decision-making hub, can only hold a limited number of items in working memory, around 4 to 7 at once. When tasks exceed this limit, the system falters. Functional imaging shows that when people are presented with excessive options, their prefrontal activity spikes briefly, then collapses, while the anterior cingulate cortex signals rising conflict. The experience is not just mental, but physiological. Stress hormones rise, attention fragments, and action stalls. This overload also explains why open-ended tasks, write a paper, clean the house, plan my future, are especially prone to procrastination. They are not tasks, but clusters of hundreds of micro-decisions. Where to start, what to prioritize, which tool to use. Each choice carries uncertainty, and the accumulation of small frictions makes avoidance feel easier than commitment. Research confirms this. In one famous experiment, shoppers were offered either 6 jams or 24 to sample. Those with 6 options were 10 times more likely to make a purchase. Too many choices did not empower, it paralyzed. Similarly, studies on students show that when assignments lack clear structure, procrastination rates rise dramatically. Ambiguity is the breeding ground of delay. Philosophically, this raises an unsettling truth. Freedom without boundaries is not liberation, but burden. When everything is possible, nothing is chosen. Procrastination, then, is not merely avoidance of effort. It is avoidance of the pain of deciding. But how do we escape this paralysis? One method is constraint by design. Narrow your focus deliberately. Instead of write a paper, decide write the introduction. Instead of clean the house, decide wash the dishes. By shrinking the field, you reduce decision fatigue. The brain thrives when choices are clear and bounded. Another approach is sequencing. Neuroscientists studying motor planning find that the brain handles complex movements like playing piano, not by storing the entire performance at once, but by chunking actions into smaller sequences. Tasks work the same way. If you outline the first few steps, your prefrontal cortex treats them as a single unit, lowering cognitive load. Experiments also show the power of defaults. When people are automatically enrolled in retirement savings plans, participation skyrockets. Defaults reduce decision-making friction by making the path of least resistance the desired action. In your own life, creating defaults, like a set study time, a designated workspace, or a morning routine, removes the need for constant decisions, freeing mental energy for action. Pause and reflect here. Think of a task you've postponed. Was it truly the work you resisted, or the ocean of choices inside it? Notice how indecision whispers louder than effort itself. Now imagine drawing a small circle around just one step. Suddenly the chaos quiets, the path narrows, action feels lighter. Philosophically, this reframes freedom. True freedom is not infinite choice, but clarity of path. To act is to accept limits, not as chains, but as guides. Procrastination thrives in ambiguity. Progress thrives in definition. And yet, even when choices are narrowed, another challenge remains. The belief that you must feel motivated first. Many wait for inspiration. For energy, for the perfect mood. But neuroscience reveals a startling truth. Motivation does not precede action, it follows it. To break procrastination, you must learn to move without waiting for readiness. You sit before the blank page, the unopened file, the silent canvas. You tell yourself, I'll start when I feel ready. When inspiration strikes, when the energy comes, when the mood is right. but the readiness never arrives. Hours slip away, then days. You are caught in a waiting room for motivation that never opens its doors. This belief that you must first feel motivated to act is one of procrastination's deepest traps. Neuroscience, however, reveals the truth. Motivation is not the spark before action, but the flame after it. The brain rewards motion with energy. Waiting does the opposite. Consider the role of dopamine. It is often called the molecule of reward, but more accurately, it is the molecule of anticipation and pursuit. Dopamine rises not when you receive a reward, but when you move toward it. Studies of the striatum and mesolimbic pathways show that dopamine spikes during effort, not before it. In other words, action generates motivation. Sitting still, waiting for the right mood, keeps dopamine flat. Experiments confirm this paradox. In one study, participants asked to begin exercising, even reluctantly reported higher motivation after just a few minutes of movement. Their brains had shifted into the dopamine loop of pursuit. Similarly, students who forced themselves to start studying for 2 minutes often continued far longer. Action bypassed resistance and awakened the neurochemical drive. Philosophically, this overturns a cultural myth that discipline means waiting for the perfect inner state. In reality, discipline is the art of beginning without it. To act before you feel ready is to summon motivation into existence. Reflect on your own experience. Have you ever dreaded starting a chore, only to find that once you began, momentum carried you further than you imagined? The first step felt heavy, but the second lighter, and soon you were immersed. This is not coincidence, it is biology. Your prefrontal cortex overcame initial inertia, dopamine followed, and the brain's perception of effort shifted. Another key lies in the effort paradox. Neuroscientists at Stanford found that the brain often interprets effort as inherently aversive before starting, but once engaged, effort becomes rewarding. The anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors conflict, decreases its alarm after initiation. Tasks literally feel easier once begun, not because they changed, but because your brain's appraisal of them did. Philosophically, this suggests that readiness is not a prerequisite, but a mirage. Waiting for motivation is like waiting for calm seas before learning to sail. The calm will never come because the practice itself is what creates stability. One method to harness this is the just start principle. Commit to beginning for an absurdly small time. Neuroscience calls this lowering the activation threshold. By telling yourself you only need to work for 2 minutes, you reduce amygdala resistance. Once the action begins, dopamine engages, and the brain reevaluates the task as achievable. This is why starting often matters more than sustaining. The first spark ignites the system. There is also a deeper layer, identity. Each action, however small, signals to the brain who you are. Behavioral scientists describe this as self-signaling. When you act, you tell yourself, I am the kind of person who begins. The medial prefrontal cortex encodes this narrative, shaping future behavior. Waiting, by contrast, signals, I am the kind of person who postpones. Every choice writes the story your brain believes. Pause here and imagine yourself tomorrow. Will your story be, I waited until I felt ready? Or will it be, I began and readiness followed? Notice how one creates delay while the other creates momentum. Philosophically, this changes our understanding of freedom. We are not free when we wait for perfect states. We are free when we act despite imperfection. Readiness is not a gift given to us. It is a state created by movement. So procrastination thrives when we wait for motivation. To escape, we must reverse the order. Act first, feel later. Begin with the smallest step. Let dopamine rise, let the flame catch, and soon you discover that the energy you were waiting for was hidden inside the action all along. Yet even when motivation follows action, another factor shapes your ability to persist, your energy itself. Fatigue, stress, and rhythms of the body profoundly influence procrastination. To understand why some days feel impossible and others effortless, we must now explore the biology of energy, how the brain's cycles, neurotransmitters, and rest patterns govern the battle between delay and momentum. Picture yourself late at night, staring at a screen, eyelids heavy, yet the work remains undone. You tell yourself you will push through, but your focus slips like water through your fingers. The more you force it, the more clumsy and distracted you become. This is not laziness, it is biology. The brain, like the body, runs on cycles of energy. To understand procrastination fully, we must explore how fatigue, stress, and rhythms of rest shape your capacity to act. Neuroscience shows that mental energy is not infinite. Each decision, each act of self-control, consumes glucose and oxygen delivered to the prefrontal cortex. Over time, this executive center tires, a phenomenon sometimes called ego depletion. While the term has been debated, what remains clear is that sustained cognitive effort reduces the brain's ability to resist distraction and regulate emotion. When your prefrontal cortex weakens, the limbic system grows louder, making procrastination far more likely. Circadian rhythms further complicate this. Deep in the brain, the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus regulates cycles of alertness tied to light and darkness. For most people, focus peaks in the mid-morning and dips in the afternoon, yet modern life often ignores these rhythms, demanding productivity at mismatched hours. Research shows that night owls, forced into early schedules, perform worse on tasks requiring attention, while morning types struggle late into the evening. Procrastination often surges when tasks collide with your biological low points. There is also the matter of ultradian rhythms, shorter cycles of about 90 minutes, during which the brain naturally oscillates between high focus and fatigue. EEG studies reveal that after about 90 minutes of sustained effort, neural efficiency drops and errors increase. To push beyond these rhythms without rest is to invite procrastination because the brain craves relief. Rest in this context is not indulgence but fuel. Stress compounds the problem. When cortisol levels rise under pressure, the amygdala becomes hyperactive while the prefrontal cortex shrinks in influence. This shifts your brain into survival mode, short-term comfort over long-term goals. Chronic stress rewires networks, making avoidance the default. Procrastination is often less about poor willpower and more about a brain flooded with stress hormones, desperately seeking escape. Philosophically, this reframes procrastination as not merely a moral failing, but a biological mismatch. To fight your cycles, to deny your fatigue, to live in constant stress is to set yourself up for delay. You are not designed to run endlessly. You are designed to pulse between effort and renewal. Experiments highlight this truth. In one study, students who scheduled tasks according to their circadian peaks performed better and procrastinated less. In another, workers encouraged to take short breaks every 90 minutes sustained higher productivity and lower stress. Rest was not the opposite of work, but the partner that made work possible. Think of your own rhythms. When do you feel naturally sharp? When do you fade? Notice how often you fight these waves, demanding peak focus at your valleys. Each time, procrastination slips in, not because you are weak, but because you are swimming against biology. Energy also ties to emotion. When the brain is fatigued, the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors conflict, becomes more sensitive. Small tasks feel larger, minor obstacles feel overwhelming. Fatigue magnifies resistance, making procrastination the path of least pain. Conversely, after rest, the same task feels lighter, as though the boulder shrank overnight. Pause here and reflect. Imagine approaching your work not as a marathon of endless force, but as a dance with your rhythms. What if procrastination was not an enemy to crush, but a signal, your brain saying, I need rest, I need alignment, I need balance? Philosophically, this invites humility. We are not machines. We are organisms bound to cycles of light, chemistry, and time. To ignore these cycles is to live in constant resistance. To honor them is to create conditions where focus flows more naturally and procrastination loses its grip. So procrastination thrives when energy wanes, when stress rises, when rhythms are denied. To overcome it, you must learn to work with your biology, not against it. Plan tasks for your peaks, rest during valleys, break effort into cycles, and treat fatigue not as failure but as data. Yet even when energy is managed, another force still tempts delay, the endless lure of digital distraction. In an age of constant pings and infinite feeds, procrastination has found new fuel. To understand its modern face, we must now explore how technology hijacks attention and rewires the brain's reward systems, pulling you away from the very tasks you intend to do. Imagine sitting down to work, your mind steady, your tools ready. Then a vibration, a notification, flickers across the screen. A message, a like, a headline. You tell yourself it will only take a second, but 10 minutes pass, then 30, then an hour. The task you began has vanished into the stream of digital noise. You have not merely lost time, you have lost attention, and with it, momentum. This is procrastination's modern mask, digital distraction. Unlike the temptations of the past, today's diversions are not accidental. They are engineered. The platforms you use daily are designed to exploit the very circuits of your brain that govern motivation, reward, and attention. At the center lies dopamine. When you scroll, swipe, or check a notification, your brain anticipates novelty. Each new post, each new message, triggers a small surge in the ventral striatum, the brain's reward hub. Crucially, dopamine peaks not with predictable rewards, but with uncertain ones. Psychologists call this the variable reward effect, discovered in studies of slot machines. A lever pulled with occasional, unpredictable payouts creates the strongest, most persistent behaviors. Social media hijacks this system. Every notification is a lever, every scroll a gamble. Neuroscientists using fMRI have shown that checking phones activates the same reward pathways as addictive substances. Each glance delivers a microdose of dopamine, reinforcing the behavior. Over time, neural pathways strengthen, making distraction not a lapse of willpower, but a conditioned reflex. Procrastination in the digital age is less about laziness and more about hijacked circuitry. Consider also the role of the default mode network, the brain's background system of self-reflection. In quiet moments, this network wanders through thoughts, linking past and future. But constant digital input hijacks these moments, filling every gap with noise. Instead of reflection, you scroll. Instead of planning, you refresh. The cost is not only productivity, but depth of thought itself. Philosophically, this raises unsettling questions about agency. How free are your choices when your attention is designed to be captured? Are you delaying tasks by choice, or are you being delayed by architecture? To procrastinate on work today may not be rebellion, but surrender to systems far larger than your will. Research on attention confirms the price. Studies show that after an interruption, it takes an average of 23 minutes to return fully to the original task. Even micro-distractions fragment working memory, leaving traces of unfinished loops that reduce cognitive performance. Digital procrastination, then, does not only steal time in chunks, it leaves a residue that lingers, lowering quality of thought long after the phone is set down. Yet there is hope in awareness. Just as technology exploits your brain's reward systems, you can redesign your environment to protect them. Digital hygiene practices, such as turning off non-essential notifications, using apps that block distracting sites, or scheduling device-free hours, reduce the number of external cues triggering the limbic system. Each removed cue gives the prefrontal cortex a clearer path to act. There are also strategies of substitution. Instead of endless scrolling, replace the urge with quick breaks. that restore rather than deplete, a short walk, a stretch, a sip of water. Neuroscience shows that such embodied actions calm the nervous system, reduce cortisol, and restore the brain's capacity for focus. Pause here and reflect. Think of the last time you lost yourself in a digital spiral. Did you feel rested after, or slightly hollow, guilty, more restless than before? That hollowness is not weakness. It is the dopamine loop, rewarding pursuit, but never satisfaction. The system was never designed to complete you, only to keep you chasing. Philosophically, this reframes procrastination in the digital age as a battle not only with yourself, but with design. To reclaim your time is also to reclaim your attention from forces that profit on your delay. Each boundary you set is not merely a productivity trick. It is an act of freedom. So procrastination today is more seductive because it is engineered, but by redesigning your digital environment, you tilt the balance back toward intention. Yet even here, another trap remains, the perfectionist belief that unless you can finish the whole task, you should not begin. To truly overcome procrastination, we must confront this myth and learn the power of small beginnings. You look at the mountain of work before you, the report, the room to clean, the project still shapeless in your mind. You think, I don't have enough time to finish now. I'll start tomorrow when I can give it the attention it deserves. But tomorrow arrives, and the same words return. The mountain never shrinks, because the belief that you must conquer it in one perfect sweep keeps you from taking even the first step. This is the perfectionist's spell, the illusion that beginning must equal finishing. It is one of procrastination's most powerful tricks. Yet neuroscience and psychology reveal a different truth. Tiny beginnings can unlock massive progress. The secret lies in the 2-minute rule, a behavioral strategy supported by cognitive science. The principle is simple. Commit to just 2 minutes of action. Write 1 sentence, wash 1 dish, open 1 file. Studies on habit formation show that lowering the activation threshold, the perceived effort required to start, bypasses the amygdala's resistance response. Once action begins, the prefrontal cortex takes over, and dopamine begins to flow. Motivation follows initiation. Neuroscientists call this process behavioral momentum. Like physics, the brain resists change at rest, but once in motion, circuits of effort reinforce themselves. Imaging studies show that after even minimal progress, reward pathways activate, making continuation easier than starting was. This is why just opening the document can lead to hours of writing. The brain rewards the state of doing, not the state of waiting. Philosophically, this reframes success. Great achievements are not born of giant leaps, but of accumulated micro-steps. To begin is already to rewrite the story. You do not have to finish today, you only have to puncture the illusion of tomorrow with the smallest act of now. Experiments confirm the power of micro-starts. In one study, students told to work for just 5 minutes on assignments often continued far beyond, while those told to work as long as you can delayed. The smaller the demand, the greater the action. The paradox is striking. Lowering the bar raises performance. This principle echoes in environmental design as well. By reducing friction around tasks, you make beginnings nearly automatic. Leave the guitar in the middle of the room, and you are more likely to play. Place your running shoes beside the bed, and you are more likely to exercise. Behavioral scientists call this choice architecture, structuring your surroundings so the easiest choice aligns with your goals. Each cue nudges the brain toward action without the weight of decision. Pause here and imagine a task you have avoided. What is the smallest piece of it? Could you touch the keyboard, open the drawer, write a single word? Notice how your body relaxes when the demand shrinks. The mountain is no longer a wall, it is a path, one stone at a time. Philosophically, this challenges the myth of tomorrow. Tomorrow is infinite, an illusion of perfect time and perfect energy. Today is limited, messy, imperfect. but today is real. By embracing the imperfect now, you make progress that tomorrow never grants. This is the essence of the minimum viable now, the smallest step that makes later easier. Begin imperfectly, and the loop of delay breaks. Begin, and tomorrow shifts from fantasy to continuation. So the way out of procrastination is not by conquering the whole, but by committing to the smallest now. Each micro-start disarms the perfectionist spell and transforms inertia into motion. Yet as you begin to reclaim the present, another dimension emerges, the link between procrastination and meaning. Tasks that feel aligned with your values flow more easily. Those that feel alien weigh heavily. To complete our journey, we must explore how procrastination is not only about time, but about identity, how shifting from avoidance to alignment changes everything. Picture two tasks on your desk. One is a form to fill out, tedious, repetitive, without personal meaning. The other is a letter to someone you love, expressing gratitude long overdue. Both require writing, both require time. Yet notice the difference in your energy. For the letter, words may flow easily. For the form, every sentence feels like pulling teeth. The difference is not difficulty, it is meaning. Procrastination often thrives where meaning is absent. Neuroscience shows that the brain's mesolimbic dopamine system, the circuit that drives motivation, lights up more strongly when tasks are linked to personal values and identity. If a task feels irrelevant or imposed, dopamine release is weak and resistance grows. By contrast, when the same cognitive effort is framed as significant, reward pathways activate and effort feels lighter. Studies confirm this. In one experiment, students given assignments framed as personally meaningful reported higher motivation and procrastinated less than those told the tasks were merely requirements. The difference was not in workload, but in perceived value. Similarly, workers who saw their tasks as contributing to a greater purpose, helping others, advancing a cause, reported less delay and greater satisfaction. Philosophically, this reveals procrastination as not just a battle with time, but a dialogue with meaning. When tasks feel disconnected from who you are, your brain resists not out of laziness, but out of misalignment. The inner voice says, "Why spend life energy on what does not matter?" Yet life is filled with necessary tasks that may never feel deeply meaningful. Bills, reports, chores. Here lies the challenge. How to weave value into the fabric of the mundane. One method is reframing. Instead of seeing the task as isolated drudgery, connect it to a larger value. The bill becomes part of caring for your family's stability. The report becomes part of your growth toward mastery. By linking effort to purpose, you engage the dopamine system in a deeper way. Another approach is values alignment. Psychologists studying acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, found that procrastination decreased when individuals clarified their core values and linked tasks to them. For example, exercising is easier if tied to caring for my health so I can be present with loved ones rather than losing weight. The same task reframed carries different emotional weight. Reflect here on your own life. What tasks do you avoid because they feel empty? And what hidden meaning might they carry if reframed? Perhaps the meeting you dread is also a chance to contribute, to learn, or to build trust. Perhaps the core you delay is an act of respect for your own space. By finding meaning, you transform resistance into willingness. Neuroscience supports this shift. fMRI studies show that when people connect tasks to intrinsic goals, the medial prefrontal cortex, a region tied to self-identity, becomes more active. This suggests that meaning literally rewires how your brain encodes effort. The same action, stripped of context, is resisted. Infused with meaning, it becomes part of the self. Philosophically, this raises a deeper reflection. Procrastination may be less about fear of effort and more about fear of insignificance. To avoid a task is sometimes to avoid the emptiness of doing something that feels disconnected from your essence. The cure, then, is not only better time management, but a clearer sense of what you live for. Pause for a moment. Imagine the task you resist most. Ask yourself, how does this connect to what I truly value? If it doesn't, can it be reframed? Or perhaps, should it be let go? Not all procrastination is weakness. Sometimes it is your soul telling you that time deserves better use. So procrastination is not only avoidance of work, but avoidance of meaninglessness. The path forward is alignment, transforming effort into expression of who you are. And yet, once meaning is found, one final step remains, to transform knowledge into lasting change. For this we must bring together all we have learnt: emotion, biology, identity, meaning, and explore how to move from the endless tomorrow to the lived reality of the now. Imagine standing at the edge of a wide river. On your side lies the familiar, the undone tasks, the repeated promises of tomorrow, the patterns of delay. On the far side lies a life lived more fully in the present, where tasks begin not in fear, but in flow, where each day holds more of your attention, your energy, your meaning. Between the shores lies the current, the pull of distraction, avoidance, and fear. The question is not whether the river exists, but how you will cross. Throughout this journey we have seen that procrastination is not mere laziness. It is the collision of biology and psychology, the prefrontal cortex struggling against the limbic system, dopamine chasing immediate rewards, the amygdala amplifying threat, and the prefrontal pathways faltering under stress and fatigue. Delay is not weakness, but wiring, yet wiring is not destiny. We have also seen that procrastination exacts costs beyond time. Unfinished tasks weigh on working memory, raise cortisol, scatter focus, and dim the richness of lived experience. It is not only deadlines you lose, but presence itself. The unfinished hums in your mind, stealing hours that could have belonged wholly to you. And we have explored the forces that shape delay, the overload of choices, the myth of waiting for motivation, the denial of biological rhythms, the hijacking of attention by digital design, the perfectionist belief that only grand finishes count, and the erosion of meaning when tasks feel detached from values. Each of these is a thread woven into the web of avoidance. Yet woven alongside them are the threads of liberation, micro-beginnings that shrink mountains into pebbles, self-compassion that softens shame and restores courage, environmental design that reduces friction and turns good choices into defaults, rhythms of rest that honor biology instead of fighting it, reframing tasks through meaning so that effort becomes expression, not exile, and above all, the discovery that motivation follows action, not the other way around. Philosophically, procrastination teaches us a paradox. To wait for the perfect moment is to abandon the only moment that ever exists. Now, tomorrow is a mirage, always promised, never real. The minimum viable now, the smallest act you can take in this breath, is the bridge across the river. Each step is small, but together they carry you to the far shore. Pause here and feel this truth. Think of the task you have delayed the longest. Notice the weight it carries. Now imagine lifting not the whole weight, but a single stone, opening the document, writing one word, making one call. That is enough. That is crossing. Neuroscience supports this humble truth. Each small act rewires circuits, strengthens prefrontal control, releases dopamine, and reshapes identity. Your brain learns, I am someone who begins. Over time, this identity builds momentum until action feels natural, procrastination less tempting. Transformation is not sudden, it is cumulative. Philosophically, this becomes a meditation on freedom. You are not free when you wait for the perfect state or the perfect tomorrow. You are free when you act despite imperfection, when you claim the present as the only real time you will ever own. So as we close, return to the image of the river. You do not need to leap the whole span. You need only step into the current with one small act. The brain will follow, motivation will rise, meaning will reveal itself in motion. And perhaps one day you will look back from the far shore and see that procrastination was never an enemy, but a teacher, showing you the cost of delay and the gift of presence. It taught you that now is not the enemy of tomorrow. Now is the seed from which tomorrow grows. So let us end with this. You cannot control the river, but you can choose to step, not with perfection, not with readiness, but with the smallest now. And that is enough to change everything.